At 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday that would change the entire course of my life, I was flat on my back in a narrow crawl space that smelled of copper pipes, dry dust, and the stale air of a building that had seen 2 decades of corporate growth. I was using a digital multimeter to figure out why the CEO's brand new $15,000 climate control system was screaming like a jet engine with a major mechanical issue. Some highly paid third-party consultant hired back in 2019 had decided to wire the entire climate system directly into the same electrical panel as the main server room. Apparently, nobody in the fancy executive suites had the common sense to check the amperage load before signing the work order. Nobody but me, that is. I remember every wire, every breaker, and every shortcut some contractor took when we expanded the east wing of the building back in 2014. I had spent 21 years keeping this physical plant running, making sure the lights stayed on, the servers remained cool, and the executive bathrooms had hot water. At that exact moment, with a voltmeter in my hand and a heavy flashlight clenched between my teeth, I had absolutely no idea that I had less than 3 hours before human resources would call me into a conference room to tell me my services were no longer needed. Redundant is a very interesting word. It sounds clean, professional, and completely detached from the reality of a human life. It is the exact kind of word corporate executives use when they want to pretend they are not doing something incredibly cruel. They treat a long-term employee like a backup generator that they do not notice until the main power grid goes down, and then they suddenly remember why it was installed there in the first place. My name is Lawrence Miller. Larry to anyone who has ever worked alongside me, which used to be just about everyone in this building. I am 58 years old. I have been the chief building engineer at this technology firm since 2002, back when there were only 5 employees. One old fax machine held together with electrical tape and business dreams that were much larger than our bank account. These days they have got over 200 employees, designer office chairs that cost more than my pickup truck, and a CEO who thinks HVAC is a type of coffee machine. That morning started like every other morning for the last 21 years of my career. I unlocked the heavy glass doors of the building at 6:47 a.m. Exactly, which was 23 minutes before anyone else arrived. I used the original brass key they gave me, back when the office was just a single room above a noisy Thai restaurant, and we could not afford real office furniture. I kept that key on a steel ring with 13 others, each one labeled in my own handwriting, and each one representing a piece of this building's history that lived in my head and nowhere else. The night cleaning crew had left someone's half-eaten takeout container in the breakroom sink again. Someone from marketing had abandoned a box of sushi in the mini fridge over the weekend, and the kombucha bottle next to it had exploded. Dealing with that was not technically my job, and it was certainly not in any contract I ever signed. But I was the one who scraped fermented tea off the inside of a smart fridge at 7 a.m. Some days I felt like the only load-bearing wall in this entire company. I was invisible, taken for granted, and only noticed when something cracked. I held everything together while they built offices and careers on top of my back. I did it in silence, because that is what you do when you believe in hard work. My father taught me that when I was 19 years old. He handed me his 1952 Craftsman toolbox, made of red steel and dented from decades of labor, and told me that you either do the job right or you do not do it at all. I still kept that toolbox in the back of my truck with the socket wrenches organized the exact same way he had them. That toolbox had more value to me than any plastic plaque they never gave me or any boast they never thought to offer. The current CEO, Bradley Shaw, thought of me as just the maintenance guy. Bradley could not tell a circuit breaker from a cappuccino machine. My inbox was always flooded with hundreds of unread work orders from people who could not change a light bulb without submitting a ticket in triplicate, and I handled every single one of them. The atmosphere in the office got significantly worse when they brought in Brandon Fletcher as the new HR director. Brandon was fresh out of graduate school, all white teeth and corporate buzzwords. He wore expensive fleece vests and talked about cultural fit like he had personally invented the concept. He probably thought a union was a type of caramelized onion. He once asked me where the Ethernet cable went, and I told him it went to the same place his performance review was headed if he did not learn how the physical world worked. He did not find it funny, and I did not care. I never went to a fancy business school. I never wore a suit that cost more than a mortgage payment. But I knew this building inside and out. I did not just manage the property, I knew its personality. I knew which pipes groaned before a winter storm, which thermostat would malfunction when the humidity crossed 70%, and where the main electrical panel made a sound like a rattlesnake if you opened it too quickly. I had kept this company breathing through power surges, burst pipes, server room floods, and the terrible decisions of 4 different administrations. And they simply forgot. There was never any real recognition. Once, after I stayed until midnight during an ice storm to restore power and save them over $200, 00, in lost server data, the old vice president handed me a half-eaten protein bar and called me Gary. My name is Lawrence, but after a while I stopped correcting them. The lease on this building was the real secret. It was the agreement that allowed us to occupy prime downtown real estate for a fraction of the current market rate. I negotiated that lease back in 2002 when the company was struggling and could not get a single landlord to return our calls. We had 5 employees and could not even qualify for a business credit card. The original founder, Harold Vance, sat across from me in a greasy diner and told me that if we did not get this lease signed, we would be working out of his garage and his wife would leave him. I did not just co-sign that lease. I signed the entire agreement in my own name because my credit score was the only thing the landlord would accept. Harold promised it was a temporary measure until the company stabilized, and that we would transfer it to the corporate entity later. We both got busy, and we both forgot. 21 years later, my name was still the only one on every single lease renewal. I handled all the lease paperwork myself, dealt with the property managers, coordinated the structural upgrades, and handled the maintenance. The executives never asked about the lease terms. They never checked the paperwork. To them, the building was just something that existed, like air or water. They did not think about how it got there. I did not mind the lack of attention at first because the company felt like a family in the early days. But corporate growth changes people. It makes them forget who dug the foundation. You walk through rooms you have spent 2 decades maintaining, and you realize that to the people inside them, you are just a ghost who fixes the printer. Then came the Monday when HR sent out an all-staff email regarding strategic realignment opportunities. In corporate language, that is the equivalent of being told to step into the alley. My stomach dropped. I had seen enough people escorted from the building with their personal belongings in cardboard boxes to know what was coming. I knew I was next, and I decided I was not going to be caught unprepared. The calendar invite arrived at 4:58 p.m. on Monday, just as I was replacing a burned-out ballast in the ceiling of the main conference room. The subject line was a simple request for a quick sync with HR the following morning. There was no context and no warning. I showed up the next morning at 9 a.m. sharp. I wore my clean denim work shirt with the original company logo from 2004 and my heavy work boots. Those boots had survived 4 CEOs, a minor office fire, and more corporate transition than I cared to remember. Brandon Fletcher was already waiting in conference room B, wearing his professional smile. Next to him was a corporate lawyer I had never seen before, a man with slicked back hair and an expensive suit who kept patting a leather folder on the table. Brandon started by saying they wanted to have a restructuring conversation. I sat there and watched him go through the standard script. First comes the sympathetic look, then the folder, then the explanation that they are moving in a new direction to modernize operations. I asked him directly if this new direction had any room for me. The silence in the room was my answer. The lawyer slid the folder across the glass table. Inside was a standard severance agreement offering 3 months of pay, an NDA clause, and health insurance extensions. The paperwork was filled with legal jargon, but the most insulting part was right at the top. They had written my name as Lawrence J. Miller. After 21 years, they did not even know I did not have a middle initial. My legal middle name is Vance, named after my grandfather, and they had not even bothered to check my personnel file. The lawyer told me they would need my security badge and all building keys immediately. I looked at the key ring in my hand, containing 14 brass keys that I had personally labeled and organized. I asked Brandon if he was absolutely sure he wanted them. He gave me a look of practiced corporate empathy and said it was not personal. I stood up, took the severance folder, and placed my badge and keys on the table. I told him he had just fired the only person who knew where the main water shutoff valve was, and I wished him the best of luck. I walked out of the building into the morning sun. I did not drive home immediately. I pulled my truck into a quiet parking lot and called Donald Finch. Donald was a young real estate attorney who lived down the street from me. He had mowed my lawn when he was in high school, and now he spent his days reading commercial contracts and dealing with property disputes. I told him what had happened, and he asked me if I still had the original lease documents from 2002. I told him I had everything. I went home and walked straight to my garage. I bypassed the files in my office and went to my father's red Craftsman toolbox. Underneath the heavy socket wrenches in the top drawer, I pulled out the yellowing lease agreement held together with rusty staples. I spread it out on my workbench. It contained the original 2002 lease, the 7 subsequent amendments, and even a crayon drawing that Harold Vance's daughter, Chloe Vance, had drawn for me when she was a little girl playing in the office lobby. I looked closely at page 12, section 9B of the agreement. It stated that any renewal of the lease term required written notice from the lessee to the landlord, no later than 30 days prior to the expiration date. The lease expiration date was August 1st. Today was August 3rd. The company executives had been so focused on their upcoming initial public offering and their executive titles that they had completely missed the deadline to renew the lease. They had not sent a letter, they had not called, and they had not notified the property manager. The lease had automatically converted to a month-to-month tenancy, and the primary leaseholder was not the company. It was me, Lawrence Miller. I realized that the company was technically trespassing on the property, and the building control was entirely in my hands. The insurance policy was still in my name, the HVAC maintenance contract was registered to my personal email, and the cleaning service was paid through my personal accounts, which I had reimbursed through expense reports. I had the power to end their tenancy with 30 days of notice. The old Lawrence would have called Harold Vance or Bradley Shaw to warn them about the mistake. But that Lawrence had just been escorted out of the building with a misspelled severance package. I decided to remain silent and let the legal system run its course. I scheduled a meeting with the property manager, Roger Henderson. I wore my clean boots and walked into his office on the 4th floor of a neighboring building. Roger was a precise man who kept his desk organized and always smelled of coffee and paper. He was surprised to see me. I handed him the original lease, the amendments, and the documentation showing that the company had failed to submit their written renewal notice by the July 1st date. Roger checked his computer system and confirmed that no renewal request had been received from the corporate officers. I informed Roger that under Clause 9B, the lease had converted to a month-to-month agreement, and I wanted to submit a formal 30-day notice of termination. Roger was stunned, but he could not dispute the contract. I also told him that I had already identified a new tenant to take over the lease immediately after the 30 days expired. The new tenant was Aurora Wellness, a growing health company run by Evelyn Brooks. Evelyn had been looking for a downtown space for months to set up her business, and she was willing to pay 3 times the rent the tech company was currently paying. Roger realized the financial benefit for the property owners and agreed to process the termination. I went home and filed the official eviction paperwork through the county court system, paying the fee to expedite the process. A few hours later, I received an email from Brandon Fletcher in HR, asking me to confirm that I had returned all physical and digital company property. I replied to the email, CCing the entire executive distribution list, stating that I had returned everything, including the things they forgot I owned. Over the next 2 weeks, the company continued its operations as if nothing had changed. The certified letters and court notices were delivered to the building's reception desk. However, the receptionist, Haley, was a temporary worker who did not understand the importance of legal documents. She placed the mail in a stack of marketing brochures and recycling, and the executives remained completely unaware of the approaching deadline. They were too busy preparing their financial presentations for investors to pay attention to the mail. On Monday morning, exactly 30 days after my termination, the legal notice took effect. At 8:03 a.m., Brandon Fletcher arrived at the building with a coffee in his hand. He found a bright orange laminated eviction notice zip-tied to the main entrance doors. The notice was issued by the county court, declaring a breach of lease terms and demanding that the occupant vacate the premises within 72 hours. Brandon tried to pull the notice down, but the heavy plastic zip ties held it firmly in place. By 8:30 a.m., Bradley Shaw arrived at the office. He was met by a crowd of confused employees standing outside on the sidewalk. He grabbed the notice, read it, and immediately called Roger Henderson. Roger confirmed that the lease had been terminated due to their failure to renew, and that the owner of the lease had decided to rent the space to a new tenant. Bradley was furious and demanded to know who was behind the eviction. When Roger told him the leaseholder of record was Lawrence Miller, Bradley refused to believe it. Bradley called me at 7:42 p.m. that evening. I was in my garage organizing my tools when my phone rang. I answered and put him on speaker. Bradley was shouting, demanding to know what I was doing, and telling me that I could not evict a multi-million-dollar company. I told him to read the original lease agreement from 2002. I explained that the company had fired the person who legally held the property rights, and that I had already signed a new agreement with Aurora Wellness. The next morning, the company attempted to fight the eviction in court. Bradley Shaw and Brandon Fletcher arrived with their corporate attorneys, presenting a document they claimed was a lease assignment agreement from 2012. The document supposedly showed that I had transferred all my rights to the lease to the corporate entity. My lawyer, Donald Finch, immediately challenged the validity of the document. We brought in a certified forensic document examiner to inspect the signature. The examiner quickly discovered that the signature on the document was a physical forgery. The executives had copied my signature from an old 2012 expense report for a $45 drill bit and pasted it onto the contract. Donald Finch presented these findings to the judge and cited California Penal Code Section 470, which defines forgery as a felony offense. He explained that because the signature was forged, the contract was void ab initio, meaning it was completely invalid from the moment of its creation and could not be enforced under U.S. law. The judge reviewed the forensic evidence and agreed with our position. He declared the document void and refused to stop the eviction. He warned Bradley Shaw and the corporate officers about the severe criminal penalties associated with forgery under California law, including potential jail time. With their legal options exhausted, the company had no choice but to comply with the 72-hour notice. The physical eviction began on Friday morning. The employees were forced to pack their personal items into cardboard boxes, while professional movers wheeled out the expensive office furniture. A local tech blogger captured a video of Bradley Shaw losing his temper and throwing a folding chair against the side of a moving truck. The video went viral within hours, causing a massive public relations disaster for the company and forcing their investors to pull out of the upcoming initial public offering. I drove past the building that afternoon. The moving trucks were pulling away, and the glass doors were empty. Evelyn Brooks and her team from Aurora Wellness were already in the lobby, measuring the walls for their new setup. Evelyn saw my truck, waved to me, and thanked me for the space. I nodded and drove away. I did not feel angry anymore. I just felt a sense of relief that the truth had been established. A few days later, Roy Higgins, one of the facilities workers who had stayed with the company, called me to let me know he had resigned. He said he could not work for executives who would treat a veteran employee so poorly. He asked me what my plans were. I looked at the phone, which had been ringing constantly with calls from other property management companies who had heard about the eviction and wanted to hire someone who actually understood how to maintain a building. I told Roy that I was starting a commercial consulting business, and I offered him a job working with me. He accepted immediately. Today, we manage the maintenance and engineering for 4 large downtown office buildings. I set my own hours, earn twice the salary I had before, and make sure that every contract I sign has my name spelled correctly. I mounted the original brass key from 2002 on a small hook in my garage, next to my father's old photo. It is not there to remind me of what I lost, but to remind me of what I built and what I had the strength to take back. The executives thought they could replace me with a younger worker and a few buzzwords. They forgot that a building requires a solid foundation, and if you remove the load-bearing wall, the entire structure will collapse. Competence and hard work never go out of style. You just have to make sure you are working for people who know how to say thank you, to make sure everything is completely understood. Let me explain the legal battle in detail. The technology firm's primary argument was that because I was an employee, any lease I signed was held in trust for the company. However, Donald Finch, my lawyer, was prepared for this defense. He pointed out that the lease had been signed in 2002, and the company was not legally incorporated until late 2003. This meant that the company did not even exist as a legal entity when the lease was established. Therefore, there was no corporation to hold the lease in trust for. We also examined the corporate bylaws and found that the company had never formally ratified or adopted the lease. They had simply paid the rent invoices that Roger Henderson's office sent them, which were addressed to me. When Bradley Shaw attempted to present the forged 2012 lease assignment agreement, he was committing a serious crime. Under California Penal Code Section 470, forgery is a wobbler offense, meaning it can be prosecuted as either a misdemeanor or a felony, carrying a maximum sentence of 3 years in county jail. By presenting this forged document to the court, the company's legal counsel had unwittingly entered fraudulent evidence. The judge was furious when our forensic document examiner, Karen Jenkins, demonstrated that the ink used on the signature block did not match the ink on the rest of the 2012 document. In fact, the ink used was a modern chemical formula that did not exist in 2012. It was a clear, undeniable case of forgery. The doctrine of void ab initio is a fundamental concept in contract law. When a contract is declared void ab initio, it means that the agreement was never legally valid. It cannot be repaired, and no court can enforce its terms. The judge ruled that the lease assignment agreement was void ab initio due to the forged signature. This left the company with no legal defense, no contract, and no right to occupy the building. The 72-hour eviction notice was enforced by the county sheriff's department. The company was required to remove all of their physical assets, including their expensive computers, servers, and office furniture. Bradley Shaw tried to negotiate for more time, but Roger Henderson refused to speak with him. Roger had already signed the new lease with Evelyn Brooks of Aurora Wellness, and the new lease was scheduled to begin the following Monday. The moving process was incredibly chaotic. The company had to hire emergency movers at triple the normal rate to pack and move their entire corporate headquarters in less than 3 days. Many of the employees were angry that the executives had allowed this to happen. They had been working long hours to prepare for the company's initial public offering, and now they were standing on the sidewalk with their belongings. The video of Bradley Shaw throwing a chair at the U-Haul truck was shared on every major tech blog and news outlet in the area. The headlines were devastating for the firm's reputation. Investors realized that the company's leadership was incompetent and had failed to manage even the basic lease on their own headquarters. Within 24 hours, the lead underwriting bank pulled out of the initial public offering, and the company's valuation collapsed. I watched the entire event unfold from a distance. I did not feel any joy in their destruction, but I felt a strong sense of validation. For 21 years, I had been the person who arrived first and left last. I had saved the company from countless disasters, and they had thrown me away like an old air filter. They had even misspelled my name on the severance letter. They thought that because I wore a denim shirt and work boots, I was not important. Today, my consulting firm is thriving. Roy Higgins and I have hired 3 additional technicians to help us manage our growing client list. We provide high-quality building engineering services to several commercial properties in the downtown area. Every time I sign a new service agreement, I read every line carefully, and I make sure my name, Lawrence Miller, is written correctly. I still have that 1952 Craftsman toolbox in the back of my truck. It is a constant reminder of my father's advice. He believed that doing good work was a matter of personal integrity, not corporate approval. I realize now that he was right. The company did not define my value. I defined it through the quality of my work. When I walked away, the building came down because they had forgotten that a structure is only as strong as its foundation. And in that office, I was the foundation.